So my name's Porangui, and it originates, it's actually Tupi-Guarani, which is indigenous language spoken in the south of Brazil. On my mother's side, it's part of our lineage. And so Poran means beauty, and Gi is like one who walks in or one who moves in beauty. So it's like one who walks in beauty would be the translation roughly in English. Yeah.
I named my daughter Jaya, which means live victoriously. And so whenever I hear names like yours, I'm always curious. Hers is Sanskrit, but I'm always curious the meaning behind it.
Yeah, it's been a tough name to live up to. I've had to work at it, still working at it, Yeah, I think it's really interesting. My father wanted to name me João Quetzalcoatl, which is after the plumed serpent. And my mom spoke with, a medicine woman, a Huichol elder who's an old friend of hers. And she was like, don't give him that name. That's way too much karma for him. And so that's when she gave me the name Porangui. But
That's so cool.
Good change up.
Yeah.
I wanted to name Jaya Aviva Karunya, which means live with compassion, but her dad was not for it. So my next daughter will be Viva Karunya.
That's interesting. Beautiful. I got my name changed like right before I was born. I was supposed to be Terra Star, Terra, so Earth Star, which is my little sister's name. But right before I was born, they decided that didn't fit for some reason. And my mom heard someone calling her own, someone else calling the name Mercedes to her daughter or something, and said, yeah, that made sense, but it means mercy or merciful. So
yeah, I love the name Mercy. What's the story of how you came to be a medicine musician?
What's the story? Well, I guess for me, growing up around music since I was little and growing up in ceremonies since I was young as well, both with my mother and my father respectively, and my grandparents, I think I always felt they kind of never were separate, to be honest. It was like they're one and the same. They're always connected. Music is, for me, that, it's really the frequency, the centering, the connectedness with the sense of the sacred. I guess I still carry that with me, is this sense of, music is what takes me there immediately. When you bring the intention and the presence to it. And so for me, music very much carries that frequency. And so when I was little, I remember my earliest memories, sitting in ceremony, for instance, my first Temazcal ceremony, which is, a sweat lodge, is what we know here in North America. And I think I was 8 years old.
Wow.
And sitting in that ceremony, in the darkness and like feeling like I'm inside the womb, of my mother again, and just feeling the earth and feeling the heat from the stones and seeing the glow of the stones and then hearing the songs being sung. And that really, that stuck with me forever, that frequency and the vibration of just like really going within and allowing sound, the vibration to permeate and to penetrate my body and my being, and feeling the energy shift in that and the connectedness to what is beyond just the visual, superficial world, the day-to-day world, if you will, the surface world. And so I feel like, since that early age, I've always seen, and I guess I should say felt, sound and its powers is in that way. So for me, just as a performer and as a musician, it's always been about how do I bridge these worlds? How do I bring that sense of that lodge, of that ceremony to a stage, to maybe to venues where people are the furthest from that space, so to speak. And so how do I weave that in? And so for me, music's always been about transformation and its power of healing as opposed to entertainment. And I think that's a big, line distinction between me and a lot of other artists, I think, that are out there. I think all artists have some sense of this, but for me, it's at the core of what drives me. It's like, I'm not doing the work that I do, to become famous and to have, the most whatever. It's really about how do I help bring a positive impact and create a field, how would I say, a very nourishing and centered and grounded field, and open up a portal in a very responsible way. Because whenever if you think about it, all music, right? If you go to a club or, your typical venues where there's alcohol and other substances potentially, people they're psychically opened up in those spaces.
Yeah.
And
they're out of their bodies.
Totally. And so the music that is being played, and whoever is commanding that music, hopefully they're doing it with some sense of awareness to the fact that is the case,
Yes.
That people are open. And so if you play really aggressive, really dark, really heavy things, you're really penetrating their energetic bodies in a very intense way that they can't just like close their ears or turn down the volume. It's like they're in it. Like you've been in a club, you feel the bass is like, it's overwhelming sometimes. And it can and so we can, kind of cope with it, but it's honestly traumatic on some levels.
Yeah.
Like our body's like bracing, especially when it's really intense, really loud. And so obviously when we're under the influence of something, we're a little numbed, or maybe we're a little, just we're extra open, in fact, whether we're aware of it or not. And so it's always a ceremony. It's just who's conducting that ceremony, and are they doing that in an intentional way?
Right.
For me, it's like, how do I bring that awareness and that mastery to it?
Yeah.
And hopefully really, like I said, open up a portal that is being stewarded in a good way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To really help.
It's interesting because my apartment had some dark activity in it. I don't know if dark is the right word, but some spiritual activity, some heaviness. And I started playing your music and Snatam Kier's music. And it's almost like it raised the frequency of the home, and that energy didn't feel comfortable here anymore. But when you say out of body in the clubs, I'm thinking too, I play both Just You and Her are the only music I play while I sleep, while I'm out of my body in the astral plane. And I'm wondering what goes on then, almost.
It made me think about a healing ceremony I had. It was a music healing, sound healing ceremony that it was my first time doing anything like that. I was laying, and it was in this like salt cave thing. And anyway, I'm laying in there and my eyes are closed. The music starts, and this shaman actually plays a lot of instruments like similar to what you play, the didge and all the flutes. And I started spinning, like when my eyes are closed, like spinning, like as if you're having like a drunk experience, like where you're so drunk, you're laid down and you're like, oh God, I can't even keep my eyes closed. I'm spinning so much. And I was spinning to the point where it was like literally frightening. This is my first experience with this. And when I'd open my eyes, it would slow down and then stop spinning. But anytime my eyes were closed, I was like just spinning, like viciously spinning. So it took me a little while to like be able to figure out what that was and hold on to it enough to settle into it. But that was really interesting. And then I started crying for the rest of the ceremony. So I had a serious energy,
emotional
experience
purge
that was coming through and allowing me to let some stuff leave my body. But yeah. Do you see a lot of really crazy experiences like that in your ceremonies?
Yeah, all the time, I guess. You see all kinds of things. I guess it's the full gamut, from the mundane to the really extraordinary. And I think a lot of times what appears mundane can be really actually very powerful. Like, because it's just, when you can see past just the surface of what's happening. Yeah, so definitely all kinds of things along the way, depending on the context, of course, and the willingness of a group to go deeper. I think that's a big part of it. So it's like, a lot of times it's almost like, I'm sure you've had this experience, people have to almost feel like they've been given permission to be able to go deeper and to allow themselves to really be enveloped or be taken by the energy or the sound. Because a lot of times it's like junior high, everyone's kind of on the wall. Like, I don't know if I trust this, if I'm going to, you know what I mean? If I'm going to let loose, like everyone's looking at me, and that very self-conscious kind of concept, which is a big reason why I love the ecstatic dance communities and an ecstatic dance music, and kind of that scene I feel like is a really beautiful scene because, for the most part, obviously people still have this. We all have this self-judgment inner critic that's always kind of at work, our ego, working. But in that context of a container where it feels safe and it's kind of at the onset, we're like saying, hey, this isn't about socializing. This isn't about, trying to look like the best dancer or whatever. It's really about give yourself permission to just go inward and to really move with the sound in whatever is the most authentic way you can move. And the healing that can come through in that is obviously, I know you all have experienced it, but it's immense. And I don't think we get enough opportunities in our modern society to do that, because most contexts where we dance or we're in a social context, it's very much like, being seen, right? And looking a certain way and kind of presenting a certain thing, or being, like dating scene or whatever, right? It's rare that we, in our modern society, like I say, like mainstream, we're not, going to dance in a ceremony where everyone is there, like, when I go and dance in ceremony myself, when I go up and dance, for instance, for Sundance, where you're not there, you're there, the whole community's around you and holding space for you, and they're there witnessing you and also dancing in their own prayer. But it's like you have hundreds and hundreds of people and their families, all ages, generations. We're all there to pray. And it's like clear, like one collective intention is to pray. Like the medium of the praying is through dance and then through other ceremonies, but that's like, it is to pray and make an offering. And so there's something really powerful when a group of people come together to express, to creatively, through whether it be through music or dance. And I think they're two sides of the same coin. And to do so with such intention as a collective field, it's so powerful. Yeah. Because the energy, like, it pulls together, and the prayer is just, it's unstoppable. It's a force. I would venture to say, it's one of the oldest, most ancient and most powerful technologies available to human beings, is pulling together that kind of focused energy. So the closest thing to that I see, in a modern context is like ecstatic dance communities, if you will, because you have people coming together in this way. Like, we're there to sweat our prayers and just let it go. No matter what your denomination, no matter what your spiritual, faith may be, we're all there for that offering. And if the DJ or musician or whoever, if they can really get that and really bring that through musically and lead, conduct the ceremony, if you will, and be the roadman or road woman, I feel like that it's truly a powerful container and vehicle for transformation.
Yeah.
And not just for ourselves, but for the earth.
And I mentioned to you last time we talked that you were one of the first people I ever saw an aura on. And I didn't even know at the time, like that. Now attending Boulder Psychic Institute, I'm able to work with that tool. But at the time, I'd never seen it before. And it was such a crazy experience for me that I honestly thought, for a minute, I thought he must be an alien, because I saw the white glow around you and then the floor behind you shifted, and it was the craziest feeling. I was completely sober, and then the second person was the person who'd become my shaman, and it was just so interesting to see the energy in the room, and like, I guess with you leading that energy shift, being like a energy shaper almost or something. It was like seeing that around you, the room, the floor, it was like, transforming. So it was really cool. But I like something that stuck out to me that you said about that you were in the sweat lodge at 8 years old. So your parents obviously the way that they raised you up played a huge role in who you've become. And as a parent myself, and I always have visions of my son joining me in plant medicine ceremonies. I haven't seen my daughter there yet, but I have visions of him there with me, and him just thanking me, like, thank you for putting this in my life. But I'm curious, what was I guess, if you could give me any parenting advice, what was the one thing they did that really shaped who you've become?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. What is one thing?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can narrow it to one thing, but I mean, I guess if I could say one thing, it's that, and this came largely, both my mother and my father are both deeply spiritual beings. In they definitely have different approaches to how they've each expressed that. But I would say the one thing is that they both were willing to do the work. And when I say that, what I mean is, like, using the example of my mom. My mother has always been a seeker. She's always done everything to go and to learn from other cultures, from other people. She's always done the work. She's put herself in those contexts and in those uncomfortable places, and gone to places where people wouldn't normally go. Just as an example, when we first moved to the United States, she sought out spiritual communities and, like, who are the people here in the United States? She's a Brazilian, didn't speak the language, anything, and ended up in the desert of all places, here, like in Phoenix and in Tucson. And she sought out, like, who's doing the work, who's really doing work. So I remember being a little kid, and at one point she had frequented a temple where it's like a Korean practice of spirituality in some Buddhism. And so she was kind of checking that out and spending time there. And she would drag me along. So I'd kind of like go with her, and do these things. And I'd be learning mantras, and then she would also then go, and she was doing a lot of work with elders, indigenous elders, specifically Lakota lineage, in some Dene. And she started to learn their songs, a lot of the medicine songs, their ceremonial songs. And that's where, as she did that, she dragged me along with her. And, me as a little kid, I'm like, I just want to watch cartoons. What are we doing? And so, it's so funny, because now later on, I so appreciate that she did all that work, and she made all that effort, cultivating her own spiritual practice. And by being my mother and doing that work, obviously that spilt over to me. I would say largely in a positive way. There's definitely things where, I definitely, when I first came to the States, like, I struggled because I already have a really difficult name. Porangui is not easily spoken, so I was called all kinds of things you could imagine. Yeah. And kids in elementary school are very cruel.
I remember.
Really cruel.
My maiden name was Buckmaster, so.
Yeah, nice. So like I would get in fights all the time at school, and like I was, the trouble kid. I was like the one they'd stick in the back of the classroom, and they were like, the principal told my parents, they're like, we're not sure what's going to happen to this kid. He has problems, and so all of those things. And even though I even was in a gifted program, because of my test scores, it was still always like I was like this odd kid out, which was really a struggle for me. And I think I really, I was constantly questioning what's my identity, because I don't fit in, right? And so, and then you add on the layer of spiritual practices, and it's like, man, right? Like, where do I fit in all this?
Yeah.
Fast forward, bouncing back and forth between, going back to Brazil, Mexico for a period, back to Arizona, into high school. When I kind of stabilized a bit, I started living with my grandparents, and they were kind of took me on to help me out, and they helped fund me to pay for part of my schooling to go to a Jesuit high school, where I really learned my English. And it's where I really kind of developed my kind of science background, like really got my foundation, if you will. So I went from being like almost barely making it through school to being top of my class. Because that point in my life, there was a major inflection point, which was at the time when my mother, she was studying at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. And she was going even deeper on her path with that group that I mentioned earlier that she was drumming with and learning the songs. She then went up and decided to do her master's degree in bilingual education, with Dene being the other language, Navajo. And so, which is a very hard language, Yeah, so my mom learned Navajo and then went and would spend time with them on the res, and was adopted by a Navajo elder grandmother who was then my grandma. And so when I would go up and spend my summers with my mom, we'd be on the res and we'd herd sheep and we'd spend time with her in her hogan. And like, that was a very formative time for me. And it was the time when my mother was then invited to Sundance. And so she became a Sundancer and danced for 8 years, which was very formidable. And so it was trippy though for me. So if you can imagine, I'm like spending my year with Jesuits learning like Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
And world religions too, because Jesuits, in their defense, are very open-minded, very scholarly, very academic. But definitely I was very confused. I was like, are you kidding? Like, so wait, we got Jesus over here, we have the red road over here, this notion of great mystery. So I'm trying to like, integrate all these things in myself and my own identity, and like, what is true?
That's what I kept coming in my heart. I was like, he still chose truth,
Yeah. And I feel what really helped me, to be honest, was my first, I guess you could say, entheogenic experience. And ironically, that was with MDMA, of all things. And I was very much anti anything. Like all through school, I come from a family with a lot of addiction, a lot of substance abuse. I mean, my uncle, two of my uncles have died from substance abuse and related things, both in Brazil and in Mexico. So a lot of stuff. So like from a little kid, I was always like, saw that, like, stay away from that. And so I had a very strong aversion. So literally, like, a lot of other kids in school smoking even cigarettes or whatever, trying to drink, or I was like, I'm good. Thank you. I'm good. And I would hang out. I could go out, hang with people. And I was the sober one, but I would still dance. I would still get down. People were like, what's your deal? What do you want? And I was just like, nothing. I'm just water. And so actually what really saved me was, so in high school, during that time, I met another fellow student in school who was a dancer as well. And he was kind of also a misfit, if you will. And he turned me on to what at that time was the underground scene, aka the rave scene, before it was even called the rave scene. And because I was like, in Brazil, you can go out dancing, as soon as you're tall enough to look over a bar, you can order a drink. So it's basically, there's no like, age limit. The prohibition is not really as real there, like the 21 restrictions. And so said you can go out dancing like early on. And dance is such a central part to us culturally, and is a big way that I would move energy. And so when I was here back in the States, I was like, what? I can't go out dancing? I have to be 21? Are you kidding me? Right? And so he turned me on to the underground scene, took me to my first party in Phoenix. And I remember like walking into this place, and like literally it was underground. It was in a underground parking garage, and get directions at this place, and then go to this other place and get number to get to map to this, It's like one of those things. And then you roll in this place, and I just, the music was going off, and there's just like everyone's dancing, and it's like, wow, this isn't like a bar or a club, or it was like everyone was just there for the music and just going off. And I was like, I could really, like, I found kind of like the closest thing to like, that sense of, if you will, a ceremonial kind of tribal experience in a weird way, if that makes sense. Because people were really there for one purpose, to connect to the music and to connect with themselves. It was like this, especially in those early days of the scene, if I would call it that, which I really appreciated about it. I feel like obviously it's gotten distorted and twisted and became all kinds of other things. You know what I mean?
So have the drugs.
Still had the drugs, right? And so there was obviously a lot of substance use at that time as well, but it wasn't alcohol, which was refreshing. I thought, because people, it was more entheogenic drugs, which were more obviously conscious, expanding, heart opening, what have you. So this friend of mine, he was very big on and so he, would always offer me, and I'd be like, I'm good. And I'd be up all night dancing with him and hanging there and like going off, and everyone would think I was rolling or whatever. So it was kind of a running joke with us, So then finally he invited me to this party that was up in in the forest near Strawberry, Arizona. And I still remember this memory because it was so pivotal in my transformation, I think, in my awakening, if you will, because we went up to this event. It's called Basics. And it was basically this crew. I think they were related to Moon Tribe back in the day. And they would throw these like forest parties. And so we go up to it, and it was in the middle of this beautiful pine forest. And, we're out there, and we literally drive up these roads, and you think you're totally lost. I'm like, what the hell? Where are we going? And suddenly we start seeing these semi trucks parked along the side of the road, like something's going on. So we get there, we start walking through the forest, and there's just these crazy lights like beaming through the forest trees. I'm like, what is this thing? And you hear the bass. And basically we got there, and it was this epic, most beautiful party. To this date, I think one of the most incredible events I've ever been to. Huge sound system out in the middle of a forest, and the music was incredible, like this really deep bass centered music that at that time was incredible. And so we're dancing all night, and then that night he offered me again, and I was like, all right, if I'd ever do it, even consider it here outside, not in some dark dingy place, like here amidst the trees. I was like, okay. And so I had half a capsule, right? We split a half a thing with him, and that was my first ever experience. And I never forget, I danced the hardest I'd ever danced that night. And then at sunrise, I remember I went and sat at the base of one of these trees, and I remember sitting there and watching the sun rise. And as I'm watching the sun come up, I felt my entire body just meld into the tree, into the roots of the tree. And it was like in this moment where like all of those kind of different fragments of spiritual orientation and all the different narratives of, who and what is God suddenly all came into one singularity. And that moment was so pivotal for me, because it was like all of a sudden it wasn't of who's telling the truth. It was like, oh, I could see they're all just different frameworks and perspectives of the same truth. Cool. And my truth was that the common thread through all of it was music. And so that was kind of a very marking moment for me. And so when I left that and I drove back to my home at the time, I remember I was listening to a DJ mix, and I was like, oh, I need to get some turntables. I need to start to learn how to do this. And so I started DJing, and that was like how I began. I actually pulled like a turntable from my grandfather and like all pieced together all this random equipment and started making mixtapes. Back then, that's how we did it, on analog tape. And so I started making DJ mixes, and eventually that fast forward, when I went on to Duke University, where I got a scholarship to go, I paid my way through the rest of school by DJing parties. And so I was DJ for a long time, and real DJ, actual 1200 techniques, spinning records and scratching and actually doing turntablism, which I feel like is the art form of DJ. It's kind of been lost. All the digital, kind of everyone's a DJ now. So it's so funny, for me, I'm always like looking back and I'm like, wow, I was like doing the first thing before it was like the trendy thing. Yeah. Because then when I stopped DJing and I started going back to live, I started producing events. And for me, it was all about creating events that were experiences for people where we mixed live music with electronic music. And the focus was not alcohol, creating like alternatives. Yeah. So it's been kind of like my orientation ever since early on. And it's kind of, and now for me, it's been how to bring more and more live, moving back into organic sounds, and how to bridge those organic sounds that are coming from various lineages and ancestral wisdom that's built into those sounds. The actual texture and the timbre of the different instruments carry a story with them and a frequency, a vibration. And so for me, it's been, how do I create this experience that a DJ creates where I can go any direction? I could mix into any record and kind of like really feel the energy of a dance floor, but do so all live. Yeah. And so that's really where it's continued to evolve. And I guess that brings us to where I am now, where it's been doing that in a very big way, really taking these instruments and doing it with analog pedals, creating this sonic medicine for people. Yeah. So I hope I answered your question.
Well,
basically your mom, the part about your mom is that she just exposed you to it all, right?
And what I got from it too is maybe even outside of what your parents exposed you to or what your mom exposed you to, but the fact that you felt like an outsider kind of drove you to ask yourself often, who am I? And just asking yourself that often throughout your life, like, allowed you to really reassess and realign, realign. Whereas most people are just like, cool, I'm fitting in today. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to like think about uncomfortable questions, like existential questions, like who am I, because it's uncomfortable. Totally. As long as I feel like everyone likes me, I'm good. But you had this other experience that pushed you to ask that more often and led you to carry that through your career That's probably why you were first at so many things.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's cool. I
yeah.
take my kids to like ecstatic dance, and we just did like a cold plunge with like Wim Hof breath work, and they're only 2 and 3, so they're staring at everybody like we're the weirdest, and they right now they're enjoying ecstatic dance, but I'm hoping that, at one point, because we're, we all go through that stage where we're feeling like an outsider. I'm hoping that it's what, gives them that strength of asking themselves, who am I? Because they've already had those moments of asking themselves that. But and they also, my family has a long line of addictions. My birth dad is an addict, so I'm going to have that talk with them too. And I love that I chose the same path as you up until I found ayahuasca. I was so anti everything, but it's usually like one or the other with people, so it's really cool that you were able to find the balance there too.
I feel like on the other hand, for me, it was like I always used drugs recreationally, and actually the way you described the rave scene back then, that was, we were going to some secret place and then getting directions to some other secret place. You got to call a certain number and like figure it out how to get to this. And you end up in the middle of amazing forest or a paintball park or whatever the thing is. I think I went to EDC back when it was at that weird broken down water park in the middle of, on the 15, like on the way to Vegas. But it was like a broke down water park. I don't know if you guys ever went to that, but before EDC was what it was Electric Daisy Carnival, and it was like an actual carnival in the middle of the desert, like literally the middle of the desert. Nothing was there. But I was doing things recreationally. I was doing MDMA or LSD recreationally, and I definitely did not have the wherewithal or the consciousness to do it with some sort of intention that would have got me to where you are. But I was going to ask you about the way that you mentioned how you have been since then learning sounds and the vibrations and the energy that each instrument puts out, or each tone of your instrument puts out. Is it almost like someone who studies, herbs or medicine or something, in a way where, these things can heal certain, like these instruments and these sounds can heal certain issues that someone might be having?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think absolutely. You can definitely equate it to, say, a hierbero vegetalista, someone who's an herbalist or who works with plants, as medicine. It all comes back to vibration, ultimately. Frequency. So whether you're working with like a plant, any specific plant, it carries a frequency or multiple frequencies within its makeup. And so when you know how to work with, first listening is the first step, right? And like, how do we listen? How do we assess? How do we do a diagnostic? How do we check in with what is in a state of lack or in a state of excess, right? Which is creating an imbalance in this case. Let's talk about the human body, right? So in our human body at any given moment, there's a lot of vibration happening. And sometimes there's areas in ways in which that vibration can be either depressed or kind of like shut down or stagnant, or maybe in a state of inflammation, for instance, or it's in a state of, where it's hyper, it's like too fast, if you will, just to kind of use some adjectives to try to describe it. Yeah. So like listening and tuning in, to use that word, it's like tuning in and listening to someone and trying to assess where they're at. So many different lineages have various tools to do this. Where Chinese medicine, they're taking your pulse, you're looking at the tongue, there's various kind of ways to kind of assess that. You're looking at kind of how the chi is moving through the energy systems of the body. If you look at it from, let's say, the perspective of, a curandero, say someone from, a lineage from Mexico, for instance, or like my grandmother or someone like that, they're going to be looking at a whole other set of things as far as like their energy field. They're going to be looking at maybe certain ways of their mannerism. There's all these kind of ways that we kind of try to pick up and listen. And then once we listen, we're then seeing, okay, now what can I do? What can I add or subtract or complement that will support this system to heal itself? Because ultimately we don't ever heal someone, right? We actually heal ourselves. And hopefully what we do is someone who is in a healing path is that you're doing everything to help the body do that work, because it's trying to. Often it's just inhibited by something. And so sonically, now coming back to your question, I feel it's very much a parallel. I mean, with music, I think the greatest musicians, and I learned this early on from my father. One of the first things that he taught me when I was very young with music was, to really listen and to same things. Like, if you're there with your instrument, whatever your instrument is, for my case, it was a guitar at the time, we'd be sitting outside and he'd say, just like, listen right now, like listen to the wind, listen to the birds, like notice what's happening right now. This is all music. And so it's like, if you can really listen, then you can hear there's always some music in the air, if you will. There's always like music, she's alive, is my belief. She's always there. She's always flowing. She's like a river. And just like a river has a life and a being and a consciousness, she's always there and she's always flowing. So it's like our ability to listen really deeply then allows us to then pick up and tune into her, almost like tuning into a channel. And if you can tune into that channel, you can then kind of bring it in like a radio station and then like capture that song or capture that frequency in that moment and then bring it through you as a channel, as a hollow bone, is a lot of times my elders would talk about it, where we can empty ourselves to really listen and get out of the way, and then that transmission can come through. Now, the degree to which you can do that in a given context or with a given person or in a given ceremony or in a given whatever is kind of like the degree to your skill set, your ability to mastery, if you will. And so you're always working to hone this. And it's not that you're always going to do it amazingly well. There's days where there's too much clutter, there's too much noise, there's too much internally, if you know what I mean. I'm out of balance, like I haven't been rested, or I haven't, been taking care of myself, or I'm on the road touring too much or whatever, or going through personal stuff with my family or with my beloved. And so in those moments, those are really the tests. Just like my upbringing, right? Or like all of us. It's like in the hardest moments, in the hardship, in the most difficult times when you're truly tested, what you do in those moments are really what make you, I believe. And I feel that your capacity to, in those moments of the most difficult challenges, to be able to center oneself and to come back to the listening and to pause just long enough for that to subside, the fire, whatever it is, the rage, the anger, all the emotional wave, whatever that may look like for you. And then I'll express from that place really allows then what comes through in those moments to be medicine. And I feel, and for whatever the context is. And so I feel like that's really been for me the key. And I'm still honing that. I don't think it ever ends. I'm a humble student. I'm far from mastery. It's like, every time I play, every time I tune in and start to slow down and listen in any performance or even in my day-to-day, it's like that listening for like, what can I give right now? What can I bring through that is going to complement? And my question always is, that's going to bring more beauty. What can I do right now that'll bring more beauty? And that's really, yeah, it is truly. And so, and I think it's the invitation, I think for all of us, it's like, how can I make this situation more beautiful? And sometimes that's being silent. Sometimes it's doing nothing. Zero is such a powerful concept that I think we forget.
Yeah, we don't
in our
use that
society.
much. Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so zero in a musical context is like the rest. Like, where do we put a rest? There's notes. Sometimes people get so focused on what the notes are, and the note has to be this thing, and we forget the most important part actually are the rests, the spaces in between the notes.
Because that's where you absorb. It's just like, corpse pose at the end of yoga or something. This is where you take in all
Shavasana, yeah. But we're so not wanting to hear our own thoughts a lot of the times that some people, they just have the TV on for background noise, so. Well,
totally. They can't even sleep without it, right? There's just so much. So I feel ultimately it, especially in our culture, and I speak when I say our culture, mainstream American culture, which you could also call corporate culture, which is in fact not very cultured. Right? It's kind of like, it's a very impoverished culture because it's a culture of consumption. It's a culture of, and this is a big part of my work also beyond performing is a lot of the retreat work that I do, and Ashley, my partner, and the work that we do with one-on-one, the clients that I see, is about empowering us to be authors, to remember that we are creators, all of us. And a large part of what's happened in this culture that we find ourselves in is consumption culture, consuming culture, is that we're disempowered. We're indoctrinated into this belief that we're not creators, that actually we're just consumers. We are just supposed to buy more stuff, right? And if you feel empty and hollow and you feel a lack of connection to self and others, then just go fill that hole, gaping hole with something, right? And either take more content in or whatever and just like consume, listen to more music, buy this, buy that. And we lose the fact that we are creators, that we are authors and authorities in ourselves. And in that process, we become sick. And I feel, frankly, as a society, we're very sick right now. And that's reflected, obviously, on all levels in our environment and our relationship to all things right now, and all the other species on the planet that we see are dying, and the planet itself going through this dying, this death. And it's kind of like everyone is waiting for humanity to like wake up and put down the phone.
Yes.
And remember what it is to be in relationship with with not just other human beings, but in relationship with all things.
Yeah.
And so sound is a powerful medium for that, because sound permeates us. Even when we're distracted, sound is always there. It's always coming. You can't really turn it off. Even if you use earplugs, there's a vibration that you'll feel. Even someone slamming their car door, you feel that, even if you have an earplug in. You know what I'm saying? So it's always there. And so we forget that. All the machines, think about all our AC units, our heaters, think about all the hum and buzz, all the Wi-Fi networks that we're constantly bombarded by. That is sound. It's vibration. Even though it's at a range that we don't hear or perceive with our eardrums, we actually are still picking it up. It's still impacting our energetic field. And a lot of times we forget this. So there's a whole condition of EMF, poisoning, where people are sick from electromagnetic frequencies.
Yeah.
And actually there's people who have allergy. Like they literally have to get off all networks. I know a dear friend of mine who's a client, and he's an amazing, Silicon Valley guy, like really amazing, owns a company in the Bay and is like top of his game. And yet he gets sick if he's online too much. Like he literally has to get away from all tech for at least like 4 days at a time. He can only work in little bursts, otherwise he gets super ill. And they were able to track it. That's what's causing it. So anyone out there is listening,
kind of a good allergy to have.
If you're listening and you feel like you need to turn this off, take a break.
Take a break right now and come back later. It's really something that we're seeing, and we're going to probably see a lot more of it before too long. I mean, as more of the airwaves are filled by all these other frequencies.
More towers put up,
Silence is going to become the new currency.
The medicine.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. I really like how you put that to words, though. That's what you're, a lot of the interviews I've listened to with you, they're amazing. I've learned so much from you and whoever's interviewing you. But a lot of the time I'm like, let him speak. We haven't heard enough from him. So I'm glad you're really like giving us so much right now. I feel like a lot of your listeners, a lot of our listeners, and a lot of the people who love you and listen to you really want that too. Like, I think that you have so much wisdom to pass along. So I'm glad you're spending this time with us.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your partner, Ashley, which you mentioned, your beloved.
Yes.
And she plays such an integral role in this ecstatic dance experience and your sound healings. And I know I got to witness that move with Majic. So tell me about her a bit.
Yeah. Wow. Ashley, so much to say. Like she's a powerhouse, and yet she is so feminine and so gentle about it.
Yeah.
She really carries herself in a really beautiful way that has been super complimentary, I think, and in a way that, it's a catch-22 for sure. Just to anyone out there who's thinking about working professional with your partner, it is not. There's definitely days where I'm like, wait, did we make the right choice? Because it takes this
like
whole
parenting.
other level.
Yeah.
Your music kid, basically.
Your baby.
Yeah, in a way, it's your baby. Exactly. The business is like your baby. And it's weird, it's like, for me, it's like my art form, and it's so personal. It's not like this business that I'm going to build and then sell it to somebody, like you typically think in our American capitalist model of businesses. But you do have to try to make it sustainable, and you have to support your family and, and your community. And for me, support the world through the mission that we have together. And so it's a lot is at stake, if you will. And so we both get that on a core level. So we work really hard. Like, we work way harder, I think, than if we just employed for somebody else or whatever and just had our 8 to 5 job.
Sure.
So definitely not knocking that. Definitely don't, this isn't for everyone. I think it's just the way we're wrapped and the way Spirit brought this to both of us and brought us together at this time. I would say it's been really our biggest challenge, our Achilles heel, is like how to not collapse the work with the relationship, and how to still create the space for just being in each other's presence and just being in the love, as opposed to, there's all these things that still have to be done and blah, blah, blah. Did you do this? I don't know. Did you do that? That whole thing, which can really be, really undermines the relationship because it all gets collapsed. So I think that's kind of been the kryptonite, if you will. And we're constantly working on that. And right now we just hired a couple people to help us and take things off of her plate and off of my plate. And the goal is, of course, always is how do we create more time just to be in love?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I guess I jumped ahead a little bit with the question. So Ashley, she is amazing. I mean, she's just amazing. I think for me, she's the first partner that I've ever had that really, at least from my, limited perspective of the feminine, as a male, but I feel like I have a sense of it within myself that really embodies the feminine on so many levels. She's an intuitive, she's a psychic. The work that we do when we're performing and when we're working with groups and retreats and what have you, especially in the ecstatic dance container, what she channels and the guidance that she does, she's like, it's just otherworldly. Like, it's so exactly what the whole dance floor is like needing in that moment. And I don't even know how she does that. Like, I mean, I kind of do, because like I kind of do that sonically, but like she does that, articulates that so well in words, with language, and like is able to say the right prompt that doesn't feel invasive, like someone's
She just
telling you
allows
what
herself
to
to
do.
be used and channeled
You
through.
know, yeah, because there's definitely, I've been in guided ecstatic dance experiences that feel almost intrusive, where it's like
Scripted.
this person's kind of like talking to me and telling me, and like it's taking me out of my thing. But she really does it in a way, in very masterfully, and we've gotten this feedback from many people, that is really gentle, and almost like the feminine is just kind of like, it's supportive, and it's like a mama, just like giving you that little extra, like letting you go a little deeper, and just like that little extra like prompt that lets you reflect, just and take your dance another degree into the depth of what's possible that you may not have considered. And so that's a masterful thing that she brings, amongst countless others. But to speak to that, because you guys got to experience a little bit of that. Yeah. And then what else can I say? She's just amazing.
You guys carry such a beautiful energy together. When you're together in a room, it's like, this sounds so creeper status, but I want to just put a picture of y'all two on my vision board and say, like, this is what I want in my own life. Like, this is what I want in my own romantic, part of my life. Yeah. That type of that there's something about it that's just so, there's no word really, like it's maybe just such an understanding. You guys have such an understanding of what the other person, balance. Yeah, maybe that's a good one. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I know if Ashley were here, she'd be laughing too, because we're always like, it's not all the roses. It's not all. Like,
I'm sure. Yeah.
We're constantly like, I would say, that's what I'm saying. Like, I guess I prefaced it kind of talking about the work, and like, it's not for everyone, because, and there's days that we totally like, why did we choose this road? Like, this is a pretty rough, like, we could have just been like in a romantic relationship. Like, you could have kept your gig and I keep my gig, but now it's like all together. So just to say, like, probably we've been 8 years now. We're 8 years together, right? As far as a couple, and it feels like a lifetime. And I would say, so like the pro con of this is that you're put into situations that are probably the most stressful possible situations you could be in. You're traveling to really odd places. You're not sleeping a lot. You're under-resourced. You're in a car. Let's say we're on drive tours way too long in a small space with the other, like, you just need space. And we just don't, which we don't get, because we're literally like, it's like go, go, go. So all of that teaches you, like, really, like what I was talking about, like how to come back to your center and constantly be working on that, because you have no other choice. It's like, you just won't make it if you don't do the work. That's as simple as that. So it's like, as a result of what we've chosen, our chosen path together, and being in service, is that it's really calling us to always come back to our highest. And like when we get to a place, let's say we're tired, whatever, it's grumpy because of this, and I need to eat, so I'm feeling hangry, whatever it is, right? And we get to this place and we have to get on stage and we have to bring it, It's just like, we both have always done this. We've both been able to be like, okay, center ourselves, drop this, let's shake it off and reconnect to our love, and let's bring this, because we both get like how important it is and how much greater than just our little petty, ego self stuff it is, our small self, and what we're here to really do, and that it's so much bigger than us. And so because we both get that on such a core level, I feel like it's work. That's why we're still together, and we're still able to do it, because it's definitely not all roses. It's definitely a lot of bumpy roads, and I think that's what makes us stronger ultimately.
Because you end up doing the work. That's so beautiful.
And knowing that you need to find separate space, silent space, and be okay with being like that, kind of drives you to find your own independence and to find your way out of codependence, or any of the issues that really cause bigger rifts down the line in a relationship. I think that's
totally,
you can see when you guys are together though, like, even if you guys have just fought or something, I bet it's still the same way. Like, you guys are like, this fucking sucks.
It's just because you're living your calling.
You're gonna go do something. You're gonna co-create for the better, for the bigger picture out there. And that holds you guys like together in some regard too, which is so cool.
It truly does. It truly does. I mean, that I feel like it's part of the glue for sure, you know?
Yeah.
And we both get it. It's like it's so much bigger than us, like I said. So I feel, yeah, and we're still working it out. It's kind of interesting. It's, like Ob and Wit, right?
Yeah.
They're a great example, right? So they're very public about their relationship and their whole poly thing. And it's funny, it's like Ashley and I are the total opposite. Like, well, in that we're like not doing the poly thing. We're like we're rocking the monogamy thing. Hey, this is what it's like, because I think it's a powerful medicine too.
Yeah.
There's something about, I mean, it can be very attractive to be like, oh, I can poly and I can stay with, be with lots of people and, try new things. And it's always, that Aquarian side of me is like all about novelty, and the Gemini side of her is all about novelty too. And yet we both get that in staying in this committed relationship and doing the work and not kind of like being able to like bypass emotional bypass or whatever, like I can go be with this other person and like express and do this. It's like it's here, it's through this relationship. I feel like we've been able to cultivate medicine that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Oh, for sure. You guys have exponentially increased what you were able to provide on your own, for sure. You have to, I mean, more community does that generally.
You have someone holding up a mirror to you all the time too, you know?
That's the thing. You said it. It's the mirror. It's like the ultimate mirror, right? Because the other in whoever our beloved is, right? And it could be our friend in a friendship or whatever. It doesn't have to be just a romantic partnership. But I feel they really reflect to us all of it, all of our, like, where our stuff is. And we see it in them. And then it triggers us. And that's exactly where we have to go and address.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you're doing the work, then you realize it all and you grow. But if you're not, then you're like, fuck you, I'm out of here.
Right.
Exactly. Jade and I are doing this a lot in this show together.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I mean, I really commend you both because it's not an easy road, but it is, I think what is there to gain and to grow is exponentially more powerful and deep. The depth of what is possible. I think the love that can come from it, I think is, I don't know. And I can't say if it's not the case with poly. I think there's a lot to be learned in that.
Sure.
So I'm not at all condemning or whatever. This is like, by all means, do it if that's your thing. But I would say that don't throw out the old monogamy thing just, with the bathwater, like, because it's not cool and it's not the newest thing, so to speak. Yeah. Or however you're looking at it historically speaking, maybe poly's been the oldest thing or whatever. But I really feel that there's something to be said about committing and like choosing.
You can go so much deeper possibly with one person also too. But we have a guest on, Tom Shadyac, who I was just thinking about it today, how he says everyone in front of you is God in drag. And like even your partner, it's like your partner is you and you are your partner and that person is God in drag. Everything that they're saying to you is just God trying to teach you something,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a great, it's a great visual.
Yeah.
That's a great visual. God in drag. I feel like one of the things that I've really been able to harvest, and I continue to harvest from the relationship with Ashley, and choosing her, because, before Ashley, I was very, like, I've always been a very faithful partner, and I went through some really traumatic times in some relationships, some of my first big serious relationships of multiple years kind of things, where I was cheated on. And then in return, I just then never trusted again. I kind of created this defense mechanism in my own story, and then connecting back to the abandonment with my mom that I went through at certain times. Yeah. I didn't get to that part of the story, but there was, that part of my childhood was there, the bouncing back and forth in my childhood between my dad and my mom, and then eventually landing with my grandparents. And in all of that, like a total lack of stability. And so feeling very alone. And so that loneliness of feeling like I can't count on anyone but myself created this like protection mechanism, my strong suit, if you will, of like, I'm all alone. And so because I'm all alone, I'm always going to have a backup plan. I've always got my like escape bag. I've always got my backpack that's packed and ready to split, And so coming to this partnership with Ashley was the first time where it was like Spirit had taken me through these other relationships that were very fiery, very passionate, but very like intense and very like almost like very warrior. Like that were just like totally not nurturing and totally testing me, and like so that I could really see Ashley, so that when kind of everything aligned, that we came together, it was like so obvious. It was like, oh yeah, this is the person that I'm ready to do the work with, And it wasn't that like she's perfect or anything
she's
like that.
She's just on the growth path with you. Yeah. And your intention is to grow together and seek together makes such a difference.
Yeah.
Isn't finding someone too who's on the part of the journey that's similar enough or in alignment, really is probably the better way to say it, as the part you're at in your journey. And And that can change, and maybe you guys start going at different paces, you know, and sometimes you move away from each other if that's the case, or move back and forth or whatever happens. But I think recognizing that, those attachment styles and that spawn from these abandonment issues we all have at some degree, you know.
All of us have them, yeah.
Oh my God, but once you can figure those things out and figure out what your partner's dealing with, you can figure out how to communicate what your needs are, and you can understand what their needs are because of those background knowings, you know.